Hello, it's Friday, the 4th of November. I'm Phil Bartram. Welcome to issue 45 of Travers Smith's Alternative Insights. This week, we're looking at some policy developments that should give further impetus to the retailisation or democratisation of alternative investment funds. As we wrote earlier this year, there's growing demand for alternative investments from individual investors, and many private fund sponsors are keen to oblige. A range of private equity, credit, and infrastructure strategies are expected to come to market between now and the end of the first quarter 2023. The largest, typically global alternative asset managers are leading the charge, and European lawmakers are keen to help. But targeting the retail market does mean real change for the fund manager, because even though the underlying investments are the same, the products, distribution channels, and compliance requirements are very different. Unlike their institutional focused equivalents, most private funds aimed at the retail market are evergreen, fully drawn, and semi-liquid, typically offering monthly subscriptions and quarterly redemptions. The distribution model is also new for many firms. Initially, managers often grant exclusivity to one or two wealth management firms or private banks, but then subsequently distribute them more widely, usually through other discretionary wealth managers. And having retail clients multiplies the compliance burdens. It adds to the chances of regulatory enforcement and increases reputational risks. All in all, it's a strategic decision that shouldn't be taken lightly. Navigating the European regulatory hurdles to wider distribution remains challenging, especially as the European Union generally treats sophisticated investors as retail by default. There are Luxembourg structures that work, and a number have been successfully launched, but the industry has been pressing lawmakers for a better, more bespoke structure. In October, the EU authorities obliged. The European Council and the Parliament announced political agreement on reforms to the EU's LTIF regime, the European Long-Term Investment Fund. The agreed changes have been warmly welcomed by the market, including industry associations AIMA and Invest Europe, who've worked hard, including with input from colleagues at Travers Smith, to get policymakers to this point. Unlike many of the existing retail funds in the market, the LTIF, even after these reforms, cannot be an evergreen structure. It must have a fixed term. That will limit its attractiveness for some, and it means that the current structures will not disappear anytime soon. But other features of the LTIF are appealing, in particular its full retail passport, and after the forthcoming changes, no minimum subscription. The reforms will also facilitate LTIF funds of funds, provided that the underlying funds are in the EU, master feeder structures, provided the master fund is also an LTIF, real estate and fintech focused funds, and some prudent borrowing. Some limited early redemptions will be possible, and the revised text should clarify some specific rules on conflicts of interest that had been inhibiting adoption. The LTIF reform process is not quite over. Technical details are still to be agreed, and a few issues still need to be ironed out. The implementation timetable is unclear, but provisions are expected to allow the new rules to be adopted early by both existing and new LTIFs. Meanwhile, policymakers in the UK remain keen to facilitate wider uptake of the UK's new structure, the Long-Term Asset Fund, or LTAF. So far, there's been limited appetite for the vehicle, which was initially designed as a way to encourage more defined contribution pension schemes to invest in private equity and infrastructure. In the UK, there has been promising progress. As part of its wider consultation on the LTAF's regulatory framework, the UK regulator, the Financial Conduct Authority, has proposed changes to the permitted links rules for unit-linked life assurance pension products to facilitate the inclusion of LTAFs in a qualifying scheme's self-select options, subject to certain protections to prevent overexposure to LTAF-linked funds. There are also reform proposals that will allow wider access for investors in non-qualifying schemes if the individual has appropriate advice. But one major obstacle to the wider adoption of LTAFs will be harder to overcome, and that's the fee structure. Many UK defined contribution schemes and their trustees are not fond of performance fees or carried interest, which are ubiquitous in private markets. Part, although only part, of this concern around fees is regulatory. In that respect, policymakers are keen to help by allowing DC scheme trustees to exclude from the charge cap certain well-designed performance fees. The charge cap is the 75 basis point cap that otherwise applies to the total charges in a default DC fund. Draft statutory guidance published last month, including a non-exhaustive and broad definition of the types of fees that can be excluded, would give significant discretion to trustees to exercise their fiduciary duties thoughtfully and with the benefit of advice to secure good risk-adjusted net returns for members. This is to be welcomed given the diversity of approaches to performance-based fees and similar arrangements in the private markets, and the benefit in allowing UK schemes to participate in established global market-tested arrangements. There are some issues with the proposed DWP guidance, which will be fed back to the government by the industry, including a failure to confirm explicitly that carried interest may be excluded where it satisfies certain criteria, although that must be intended, we think. In any case, solving this regulatory issue is only part of the answer. There's a significant reluctance among DC trustees to accept the higher fees that prevail in private markets, partly as a result of the labour-intensive active investment model. As successive studies have emphasised, trustees ought to consider the net of fee returns and indeed other benefits that are available in the private markets. At the same time, there's also a willingness to open the LTAF to retail investors, natural persons more widely, beyond DC pension schemes. Current regulation restricts such retail distribution. However, the FCA's consultation on LTAFs that closed last month proposed to allow distribution to individuals who, amongst other requirements, have been subject to an appropriateness assessment and who invest a maximum of 10% of their investable assets into LTAFs and related products as part of a wider investment portfolio. Many in the industry have welcomed these proposals, although the British Private Equity and Venture Capital Association's response stresses the need for appropriate investor protection to ensure that individuals understand the product, especially its lack of short-term liquidity. The UK-centric LTAF may take longer to get traction in the market, in part because many alternatives firms do not currently have the right UK regulatory licence to operate an authorised fund of this sort. Alternatives managers are currently focused on the bigger opportunity for pan-European products targeted at EU-based wealth managers, which also generally work for UK wealth managers with high net worth clients and possibly also Middle Eastern and Southeast Asian investors. The LTAF is a worthy project, though, which may become a useful sister to other international structures as democratisation of alternatives takes hold. Firms that want to tap high net worth investors, a growing and potentially significant distribution channel, shouldn't underestimate the internal changes that will be required and the risks that must be carefully managed, especially if any UK FCA authorised firm is involved in the distribution chain. But with help from policymakers, the path to retailisation is growing clearer. Firms that can dedicate the required time and resources are using it effectively to diversify their investor base. Thank you for listening. If you'd like more information on this topic, please check out our website, where you can also sign up to receive future editions of these insights, or drop me an email, phil.bartram@traversmith.com.